this is a nice, neat little topic, unique, and Bruce is a great presenter with a lot to speak to. So Bruce is a lighting artist and founder of Ramus Illumination. Ramus presents his work as compelling platforms for expansion, both personal and civic, designed to reflect our environment, encourage social engagement, and foster an articulate visual civic voice. Bruce is Canadian born. Began his career in the live music industry when he was 19 and has been working as a light artist ever since. He's designed and directed countless international live shows with rock bands including U2, R.E.M, David Bowie, Bryan Adams, David Byrne, James Brown, and lighting design for artist appearances on the Academy Awards, Grammys, MTV, ARIA Awards, Super Bowl halftime show. Am I missing anything, Bruce? Is that pretty much all of it?
That's plenty, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
06, Bruce started Ramus Illumination in Melbourne, and he's been rocking out in the studio ever since. So Bruce, I'm going to pass it over to you. You can take it away from here. Everybody, please welcome Bruce Ramus. Give him a warm applause. He can't hear you. You're all muted, but you can clap anyway. Just so you folks know as well, any questions, just post them in the chat line. And at the end of the session, Bruce will address the questions and we'll go from there. All right, Bruce?
Yes, thank you, Carl. Thanks for the kind introduction. Thanks everyone for signing in and checking it out. It's very interesting. It's really my first webinar. I am used to presenting live, but yeah, I'm not a webinar. I'm an experienced webinist, if that's the term. And thank you, though, for coming. So let me just share my screen so you can see a presentation. Let me just do that now. And hopefully you can all see the logo on the screen. I hope. So my name is Bruce Ramus, is the way you say it. Bruce Ramus. And I've been working with light since the late 1970s. I'm a student of light. I communicate with light. I'm not unique in that sense. We all communicate with light. We are made of light. I can see it in your eyes. Maybe not over the webinar, but if I were to see you, I would see it in your eyes, in your skin, in your hair. And if you cut us open, you would see that we emit light. I know that sounds a bit far-fetched, but I've seen it. And I did need a very big microscope to see that wavelength of light, but it was there at a cellular level. They call it autofluorescence. We do emit light. We are light. We understand light so deeply, whether it's a porch light welcoming us home, a bedside light to read by, a sunset or a sunrise. It's felt by all of us equally. It shapes us. It colors what we see. It defines the rhythm of our days. Through it, we flourish. Without it, we wither. Light does not discriminate. Poor, wealthy, young or old, Indigenous or immigrant. It's an experience we all share. It's given freely. It's an energy we feel in our bodies, and that feeling transcends culture. It transcends a lived experience, and it connects us all. Light is in our language, of course. If we think a person is intelligent, they're considered bright or even brilliant. If not, we think they might be dim. A face can be beaming. A pregnant woman can glow. When we come to understand something, we have seen the light. We may even become enlightened. So this vocabulary indicates how we experience each other, how we connect. And if you didn't have words, I'd still know who you are by the light you give. And this light is the media we all express through. It is how we communicate. I started to become aware of this back when I was designing and directing rock concerts. I was working with a band called U2, as Carl mentioned, and it predated the use of cell phones. Some of you may remember from that time. And if the audience wished to engage, show their support, become part of the vibe, of the light, they'd hold up a lighter. And in the Northern Hemisphere, they would just stand there with their lighter glowing. It was beautiful, really beautiful. In the warmer countries, they don't hold it static. They flick their lighter to the beat. And in stadiums, when they do that, you see the sound waves move across the space. Here's an example. This is U2, 1997-ish, tour called Pop Mart in Mexico City. And here are the people flicking their lighters to the beat. You see the sound waves coming across the stadium. This is public engagement. This is communication. You're using light to communicate. So this is happening in our cities. And this is the start of my awareness of what is now called media architecture. So let's break it down. Media, the main means of mass communication. That makes sense? Architecture, the complex or carefully designed structure of something. Those are the definitions. When I Googled it, this is what it said. Complex or carefully designed structure of something. So we're building a structure of light for us all to communicate. And I see this structure of light differently to most structures. I see it as a way of dematerializing our cities, making them more formless, lighter, more like who we truly are. Now, the built form can, of course, be beautiful, elegant, full of light. Like this. This is the Louvre in Abu Dhabi. Beautiful. Look at the light coming down there. Don't really need any artificial light in this setting. But it is often, the built form that is often dense and hard, not at our scale, difficult to engage with. I can't tell what's going on in these buildings. I don't know. What are they saying? So when we add artificial light to a facade or a lobby or a public space, it creates a sense that that form is multidimensional. You can see into it, you can see through it. Or that the form can now move. Or indeed that the building's no longer there at all. Here's an example. This is one of our projects. This is in Melbourne. It's called 88. The address is 888 Collins Street. It's called the Lighthouse and is often called the Weather Building. And this building is solar powered. All the lights are solar powered. And we put a weather station on the roof. We gather the data from the weather, and that's what drives the lights. The light is the media. It communicates space. It deconstructs form. And we gradually become aware of the difference between dense and light, between form and formless, between gray, hard surfaces and soft, luminous textures. So we've known this innately forever, all of us. It's a reawakened awareness. It's us realizing we can claim the spaces we live in, realizing we want to create spaces that reflect who we are and have less of those spaces that exploit who we are not. That's the basis of my understanding of media architecture. Because these are our cities. We live in them. And we can choose the quality of our light, how we communicate. So we say how our cities feel. So we can have this, Feel the space in that? This is like almost all space. Quite extraordinary. Or we can have this. This to me is old thinking. Television at a civic scale. There's very little space in this. Very little space. Exciting. Would you want to stay there? How long are you going to hang out there? That's New York City, of course, Times Square. Or London, Piccadilly Circus. Now, most people I know, they don't want to look at ads. We change the channel, we move on. Because it doesn't actually reflect who we are. That is not our narrative. Tokyo, Shinjuku. So if these are our cities, surely we have the right to choose how our cities communicate, what they say about us. In these examples I've just given, who's choosing what our cities say now? Does this speak for you, me? Maybe we need to think about changing the policy that allows this. Some folks think this is beautiful. That's cool. That's cool. It doesn't give me much space. So this awareness of whose narrative is being communicated is growing. We're at a time now where visual literacy is high, perhaps higher than ever. We all have lights or screens in our
Sorry,
pockets.
Bruce, it sounds like there's a few people to be let in. Could you just hit the admit button?
Sure can.
Please? Thank you.
No problem. Just bail out of that. Stop the share. Admit all. Yeah, just let me, I don't see them when I'm sharing the screen, so let me know if that happens again. Thanks, Carl. Let me just, yep, that's all good. We'll keep going. This awareness of whose narrative is being communicated is growing. As I said, we're at a time now where visual literacy is high, perhaps higher than ever. We all have lights in our pockets. We have them in the back seats of our cars. We have them at the petrol stations. And we choose what we watch and when we want to watch it. So that literacy or that awareness can bring forth a media architecture that starts to shape a different narrative and that will change the way our cities feel. And it will, over time, translate into public policy. And these narratives, these stories are seen in architecture, in public spaces. They're told by developers and builders, by governments, religious leaders, commercial operators. Now, that's not new, of course. For instance, this is Bernini, 17th century. This is media architecture, isn't it? This is using light. This is changing the space. This is a narrative. This is a relatively closed narrative. You're not allowed to say how this narrative goes. This is Notre Dame, 12th century. Again, amazing, beautiful media architecture, long time ago. Sagrada Familia, Barcelona, 18th century. Still going. Sainte-Chapelle, 13th century. Again, they use light, they use narrative. This is media architecture. It's been happening for quite some time. Even more recently, in this context, Buffalo, New York, beautiful. Dallas, Texas, media architecture. This all have the qualities of that. They are light, they're using narrative to get a message across, to bring that light and color into our spaces. But these narratives, as I say, are not yours to shape. These are the corporations of the past. They define the narrative, just like with today's advertising screens. Now, I'm not anti-corporation, don't get me wrong. I run a small one myself. But the predominant narrative of our cities should be that of its citizens. So, bring it forward. Modern images and narratives can look like this. Advertise here. Or it can look like this. This, Croatia, Chicago. And of course, this is all part of the art world as well now. James Turrell, many of you will know him, king of light artists, perhaps some would say. Another one of James Turrell's works. Or Dan Roosegaard in the Netherlands. Or this, extraordinary stories told through media architecture in a bank in Denver. Looks like a wall, and then transforms. Beautiful. So well done. You see how that bank just completely transformed. Quite remarkable. Or this new one in Seoul. So all of this use light and color and narrative in our cities. And it's not just in the buildings, of course, it's in the way we use light, perceive light, how our cities are commonly lit. What is it communicating? Sometimes it's communicating clearly. Traffic lights, for example. We all agree that if the light is colored green, we go. And if it's red, we let others go. That's very collaborative. Other times, I don't think the way we light spaces is communicating clearly at all. Let's have a quick look at street lighting. Here's some shots of Melbourne. This is Melbourne being lit in the rain, in the winter. These are some of the street lights around Melbourne. Mainly, the idea is that we can see at night. That's the idea. And so we can feel safe. So the spaces are lit so we can feel safe. But this lighting is all overhead light, floods the ground. And overhead lights cast shadows under our eyes. And they make us look sinister. Does that communicate safety? Not sure. So this chap, he's looking a little bit shifty. This guy could be shifty, but he's very sculptured. He's a movie star. So, I don't know. Could we walk around our cities looking like movie stars? I don't know. Is that possible? So if I look at this guy, that's the overhead light on. Something's going on. What does this guy want? If I turn it off, oh, that feels better. That feels better. So after dark, there's more space. We see differently. So how do we see our cities? How do we experience them at night? What are they communicating? What do they say about us? What is the light you use, you design? There's so many people who work with light just on this webinar. So what does the light you use say about you? Whose story is it? Is it a story about technology? Is it a story about what you want to say? And what does it say about your community? These are all questions, and sometimes a question is more important than the answer. So whatever you wish to call it, specialist lighting, feature lighting, digital facades, architainment, I've even heard it called. Media architecture has been in your city for a very, very long time. And so if we want to be heard and seen, and that is filtering into all of these disciplines, what is it about our light and our narrative, sharing what we see and who we are in the collective expressions of our cities? And the question, again, is more important than the answer. This growing awareness, this light is a paradigm shift in urban design, an expansive shift towards a more habitable future, a people-centered future, because we want our cities to create space, not take up space. And this is the potential of media architecture. This is the possibility I see. So I want to show some examples of work we've done from our studio over the past 12 years that indicates how I see media architecture. Some are simple and subtle, some are large and more performative, and all are my attempts to create space and communicate with light. So, if you're up for it, I'll have a go. I started with temporary commissions. My first was on this building, which most of you will recognize as the Sydney Opera House. I was an artist in residence in this building for a couple of years and collaborated on these works in 2009 with Brian Eno and 2010 with Laurie Anderson. They did the content, I arranged the projection. This was back a little while before projection mapping is where it is now, so popular and so ubiquitous. And this was when I started to learn I could do something different to rock and roll. Very different energy. Everything moving quite slow, gently, allowed people to stay. It started to create space in this area of the city that people could linger and consider it. They could interpret this. It's quite abstract. They could interpret it. They could read their story in this building now. Very interesting. Then I tried something here in Melbourne, in the center of Melbourne, in a place called Federation Square. And this was a piece called Light Hearts. And we built a pyramid out of scaffolding, and we invited the community to make lanterns. And so they came, and they colored them in, and we laminated them. The kids handed them up to the riggers, and they watched as their lantern ascended up into the pyramid. And so this went on for maybe a month, and we had about 750,000 people come through this pyramid. It was gorgeous. And in the end, it all just lit up with all these lanterns and this movement. And over time, it just sort of grew and grew as a community art project. It was very beautiful, very beautiful. And this one is called the Helix Tree. You can kind of guess why. It's a tree shaped like a helix. And this helix tree responded to people singing to it. So this too is in Federation Square. And people would come every night and sing to this tree. It was quite extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. This one is an artwork, a public, this is at a festival called White Night, and this is called Enlighten, where it's a street performance, you could say, with angels, and the light is used to frame their space. So those are three more art-based temporary works. Sorry, it's a bit loud. Then we moved into more permanent works. This is a piece in Sydney and Commonwealth Bank headquarters, commissioned by Lend-Lease, the developer, where we put a light in every window of the building, which created a 4-pixel high screen. Very low resolution, but it's 150 meters wide, and it embraces the square. It's interactive. So this chap here, he can pick a color, change the color. These kids are playing Pong on the building. So this has been running, I'll just stop it there for a sec. This has been running for 8 years now, 7 nights a week. You're only allowed to interact with it on weekends. But the point of this is that the people who live there get to change the color of the buildings in their cities. That's extraordinary. That's extraordinary, in my view. So this was called Luminous, the Darling Quarter. Hope you get to see it one day. We did one at the same year in 2012 in Brisbane. And I started to get this idea of low resolution. This is an image, it's 90 meters long, but it's only 25 pixels high. And I think most of you can speak pixels. That's not very many pixels. But your brain still figures out that there's a girl swinging on a swing. So that's actually quite extraordinary, that your brain just fills in the gaps. You don't even think about it. It just fills in the gaps of how that works. So that to me, I started to see how we could create space within the design for people to be, and for them to interpret their narrative. This is a stadium in Melbourne, same year, 2012, where we did the roof. And these pixels are now 4.5 meters apart, but you still read patterns and shapes and color movement. And this responds to the rhythm of the stadium and the rhythm of the city. So it has a resting time, and then it has a game time. So it very much responds to the rhythm of the city. So those are ones that all happened probably 8 or so years ago. This is one that hasn't even launched yet. It will do in a couple of weeks, that we just finished. This is on a university, and it is an architectural facade which has an incredible depth to the system. So what you're seeing there is lights pointing at you and lights pointing away from you, lighting the back wall. So you get a volumetric light. You start to get a volumetric image on this facade. So we haven't even named this one yet. We're still working on that. But it's a great example of how you can integrate light into the architecture. They wanted it to really sing, to really be something that speaks to their university, and to be a beacon, to draw people in. And this is just us programming it at the time, and testing out different color palettes and different types of movements, etc. So it really came up very beautifully. So that's a set of lights diffused on the front, and another set not diffused, pointing backwards. So that is just about to be recent, going to be launched probably in the next couple of weeks, I think. So that's some of our permanent works. I'll continue, because some of these works are not this grand and not this performative, I guess. Some are more simple architectural designs, like this. This is in Sydney, 345 George Place it's called. And there's still movement in this. There's still a sense of color in the space. But you can see how, when you turn these lights off, that's a very tough stone wall. Beautifully designed, but it's a hard surface to touch. When you add light to it, it starts to dematerialize. Same with the ceiling. So you can see how this whole space is sort of transformed and articulated even. So it's not like it does away with the architecture, it dematerializes it and starts to soften it and allows it to speak. So that's our sort of soft, subtle, simple architectural designs. Whereas often we're called to do what I showed you before, which is more performative. And when I spoke about low resolution stuff, this is a great example. Boom, bunch of palm trees behind a casino at the main entrance of a casino on the Gold Coast here in Australia. And so most of the image that you're seeing in this canvas isn't even there. And so we wrapped these palm trees with lights, and there are different shapes and sizes and different distances apart. And most of this image is gaps. And despite those gaps, when the people start walking across the screen, your brain just fills in those gaps. Magic. So you don't even have to think about it. You can see, I'm hoping on a webinar, you can see those images, those people, or this woman dancing. You can see that. And the same on the front side of this casino, or integrated resort development, is a projected piece. And these images are only projected on the balconies. So half of the image isn't there. So the people inside can't see the light at all. But still, your brain fills in these gaps. You don't even really think about the gaps. You see the fireworks. You saw people dancing on the beach. All of this, your brain just works out. There's a sea turtle, on the biggest sea turtle ever, on the building, and you can totally see that. And they wanted us to go a step further in their property in Sydney, do it indoors. And so we did, went a step further. So here is a screen that's curved, 8K in resolution, very high res. The walls are video elements, the ceiling is video elements, and there's a water feature cascading from the middle. So this is an amazing experience to go in. It is so immersive. You are immersed in light and image. And all of these videos, as you watch them, I imagine they appear just overwhelming sometimes. There's so much light, and it's contained in a small video space. When you go to these and you experience them in person, you experience them as they are in the space. They are tuned to the space and integrated with the space. So it doesn't overwhelm. The brightness is set. Most of our installations we run at less than 30% brightness. So it sits within the space. It doesn't project light everywhere. It's not overwhelming. So that has to be explained because you're just watching the video. But maybe some of you have seen them in person. Maybe some of them you will be encouraged to journey here after when we're in the newer world of being able to travel again. So this is a good example of the type of content we make as well. We all make all the content. This is the texture of Sydney, the light and movement of Sydney. It's actually really big and very gentle, as are most of our installations. Simpler, subtler ones like this in Singapore, which is more of a combination of low res and high res, light and video, moves very subtly, very abstract, sits in the space, very calm. Or this one in Melbourne, which is called The Pipes, which is a series of 11-meter poles, have sound and audio and camera. And this one, a digital painting in a lobby. This digital painting is connected to the tides. So as the tides rise and fall, this building happens to be located where the river meets the sea in Melbourne. Rivers meet the sea. And it's also where people ebb and flow into the building. They come in the morning, they go out at lunch, and they come back in after lunch and go out in the evening. So we felt to connect this piece with something that relates to this site, that is in context. And that is what you're seeing. The white is the land, and the blue is the bay. And the tides rise up and take over the land, and they just ebb and flow as you go through the day. It's just an artwork that just breathes, gently moves throughout the day. So every time you walk in, it's slightly different depending on the tides. So it's not necessarily a video, it is a connected generative work. So there are others, larger ones, like this one, which is what we consider more of a public art platform. This is in a public square in Perth. And with these works, we develop a curated program. So once we launch this, you can see there's some low resolution screens here, the canopy, and a high resolution cylinder over on the right here in a brand new public space. And we curate this now to encourage other artists and students and community groups to begin to express themselves on this canvas, to bring their works, their artists, their stories to this canvas. So they get to say what their community sees and what their city looks like. And this particular piece has changed the rhythm of this part of Perth quite dramatically. Because it slows things down, it starts to move much gently, and the scale it's at really allows people to slow down, to linger. Really has been quite remarkable. So there's a couple of others, and then I'll wrap up and take some of your questions. Another one of the public art platforms we've done is in Melbourne, which is this, which turned the entire building into a screen or into a light display. The client wanted an event screen, but they wanted to dematerialize the building. It was our suggestion, but they went for it. And so all of a sudden, it's like you can see right through the building or into it, or somehow where before it had no windows. It was just a blank wall. And now it plays the texture of Melbourne. And they still use it for events as well. Completely, yeah, the building almost disappears when you're in this spot. You don't see the building, you see the light. And this too has a program, a curated program, where lots of different artists, community groups, students, they all get to tell their stories on this canvas. So we do other things, larger things even, stadiums, etc. And we're now being asked to do more permanent shows. Here's a stadium that we did. And these permanent shows are a cross between my experience in large-scale theatrics and permanent architectural installations. So, let me just stop this share here. So you can see me. And the result of those you'll see coming over the next year or so. So those are some of our projects. Those are some of my thoughts and feelings about my work and how I see what we as a studio do. So what does it say about me? I want to allow or encourage where I live to be lighter, gentler, more multidimensional. So media architecture, to me, is a way I communicate with light, who I am and how I wish to live. That's my take. I am an expert, like everyone here. I'm also a student, like everyone here. I know IES is a relatively small organization in global terms, and perhaps in comparison to the big firms that are shaping our cities. But here we hold the seed, opening by which we all will make a very large difference over the next 50 to 100 years. We have just begun. Very exciting. So thank you for listening. That is the end of my presentation. I'm very open to taking questions if you want to drop them on the chat. And I see a few coming in now. So yeah, send the chat through. I'll read out the question. And if you don't have any questions and you want to leave, that's cool. But I am very interested in what you have to ask. The first question we have is, what is the biggest barrier for small businesses to play with light? The biggest barrier? Well, I don't really see that there are big barriers. I guess the question, it's hard to know what context you're talking about. But I think it is more, as my presentation states, we're doing it all the time anyway. If you're looking for a commercial way to use light, that is, yeah, I know all my projects look huge and expensive. Yeah, quite a lot of them are. It's true. And I think that, as I said before, the way we use light, each of us, we may think that, like what I'm talking about is some of those works that I showed are huge and they are expensive. There's no doubt about that. That only really relates to, I've been doing it as I said, since 1979. So I've built a way of working and communicating that clients who want to spend that kind of money will listen to. They will buy that. And so, but that means just because I am communicating with light in a way that is accessible to those folks. So that doesn't mean, you know, how I communicate with my wife or my son is the same way. So it's a tricky question to answer, and I'd probably need some more context to really get into it. And Rachel asked, where did you learn what you know? School? Degree? No, not really, unless you consider the road a school. I'm a road scholar, as they say. So I learned on the road. I learned by doing it. I learned by trying things, failing, trying again, succeeding, trying again. So working with light. The medium that I got to work, show light in was music and the music business. So I did get to play with that structure using light and start to learn how did people respond? What did they, what moved them? What engaged them? So that's where I learned. Yeah, that's where I learned.
Bruce, so maybe to expand on the biggest barrier question, in your experience coordinating with municipalities like Melbourne, has there ever been any concerns brought up around being dark sky friendly? Because out here, where we are in Vancouver, west coast of North America, a lot of folks like to wave the dark sky flag. A lot of folks like to be dark sky purists, and a lot of municipalities are afraid to almost explore these sort of architectural features for fear of backlash. How do you maybe address that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we get it all the time, and we're very conscious of it. And it is, so I guess that we address it in a couple of ways. So with the building in 888 Collins, that first one I showed, it looks, again, on the video, it just looks overwhelming. The way it's designed, when you go in front of it, that light does not project past the sidewalk right in front of the building. So if you're walking in the street, you don't even get lit, right? So the whole building is contained within itself. So it's running at a brightness of about 25%. The lights are diffused, they're contained within the building, and it's designed, it's a very low wattage LED. It's designed to be contained. It's not designed to project light out. So we really focus on that. We don't want to impose the light on others. We don't want to contribute to light pollution or hamper the dark sky. Obviously we are not dark sky purists. You couldn't say that about us. But it is important to us to not impose that light. It is important to develop a quality of light. And so the policies, and we do work at a policy level as well with City of Sydney, City of Melbourne, City of Perth, where, because lighting they have some guidelines that are mostly outdated, but some guidelines that try and govern how light is used and abused. But most of those guidelines really speak to obvious examples. If there's a stadium in a suburb, make sure the floodlights don't spill over to the houses. If those are things that are quite obvious and covered. But the example I gave of a street light where the light, it's so glaring, and there's a street light that shines right into my house every day. And I'm like, so there's nothing that really, there's no guidelines around that. So we're looking to try and refine the guidelines to make them more meaningful. There's really very few guidelines on LED screens. You can just run them as bright as you want. That's crazy. It's It's just so much light, and that is polluting our cities. So while I'm not a dark sky purist, we do spend a lot of time addressing the quality of light and how that light does not impose on the surrounding buildings and the people, of course. So I guess I'd address it that way. Ellie, you ask, do you have different expertise in your team, like programmers, media designers, as some of the projects are very complex? Yes, we do. We do. We have all sorts of different folks who work with us, and either in our team here in Melbourne or further afield. They work on most of our projects. And they range from architects and industrial designers, to software developers, programmers, to animators, filmmakers. So it is, and we have people who are equally as important, who are financial people and contract administrators and project managers that get these things built, because so much of our work, like if you imagine, for instance, that stadium project or the public square in Perth, those projects took 5 or 6 years to complete. And the creative part was maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 months at the beginning and maybe 2 or 3 weeks at the end. And the rest of the time was documentation and project management and making the communication of the design clear. So equally as important as our designers and our developers are our builders, our project managers, our contract administrators, our lawyers, our cleaners. These are people that are equally as important to us and are all part of our team. Yeah. And another question, where is this media architecture being supported? Singapore, Melbourne, Dubai. So in Asia, it is ubiquitous. So we have a lot of projects in China, and relatively new to that space, but we've been working there now for a year. And the projects take time to come out. But that is there in Singapore, some in Dubai, not as much, but in Asia, it is, there is media architecture everywhere. And some of it's really crap. Some of it is really imposing and very difficult to stay with and watch, has to be said. As some, the scale of it is staggering, is amazing. But it's very much happening in Australia as well. It's coming here more and more often. In Europe, some, to some degree. North America, not as much. It's not as mature a market. And certainly in Canada, it is a more conservative place, I'm finding. Being from there, I am from BC, yeah, so it hasn't quite caught on there. Bob asked if we have any installations anywhere in North America. If no, is there a reason that makes it prohibitive? That's a good question, Bob. We don't have any installations yet in North America. We're very keen to do that. But as yet, there hasn't really been an opening for us there, or a kind of eagerness to have us. So, and we're pretty busy over here. So we haven't yet gone there. I don't think there's a particular reason that is prohibitive. To be honest, I think when you think about the percentage of what these installations cost in relation to what the building costs and the property costs, it's just a fraction. It's a fraction, and it can define what that building says at night. So I don't think there is a reason that makes it prohibitive. I think it is a less mature market for this in North America at the moment. Yeah. Hello, John. John Terry is on the call, which is awesome. John's a fabulous artist in Perth. Check his work out. As an architect, artist, choreographer of light in an urban context, he found it fascinating the way the current work was contextualized. is there scope to influence the everyday? For example, there's a raw industrial city changed the street lights as they were affecting the sea turtles coming to the shore in the city. Often as artists, we are brought in on the end. How do we get in earlier? That's a great question, John. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, it's so interesting that I didn't know about that in Port Hedland, and about changing the lights so they don't affect the sea turtles. But John's question is, as artists and designers, we found this as well. Back in 2012, we'd get these jobs, the building was built, what do? We want to have light, what do we do? And so we were sort of retrofitting and drilling holes to run wires everywhere. Now it's more that we are involved at the design stage with the architects, with the developers, with the designers. And to me, it's coming more and more. You know, I know, John, you were involved in Yagan Square, and you were involved pretty early in that process, I remember. And I think it is about learning that language. You know, there is a language that I had to learn, a corporate language, a developer's language, almost a legal language, to allow my voice into that room. So it is about learning how to communicate, and then delivering, and as you do all the time. So I think for me anyway, John, that was how it came about for me, is communicating, defining, redefining, and refining my means of communication. And that began to get me heard, so people would meet me in the sense of, can I meet you at your office, and meet me as a person, actually see me as a person. So refining my means of communication, dropping whatever preconceived expectations I might have had, and learning the language of those I wish to engage with. That's how it came about for me, because now we are at the beginning of many. They still come late, some of them, but a lot of them are, now we're in, you know, before the ground has been dug. Thanks for all these questions, you guys. This is really great. Bosco Shaw, hello. Can you talk about the process you used to move from the entertainment to architectural industry? Yeah, and it wasn't a particularly considered one, I have to say. It was understanding how light works, how people engage with it, how they're drawn to it, and then starting to articulate that from what I understood. So was how would I say this? It was me claiming my own vision of what I see and what I want to see and what I think what I see coming. So as people who work with light all the time, it is a means of communication we are familiar with. So claim that. You have to know that you have an expertise that people are drawn to. And so when I started to do a series of lectures where I said, here's what I did then, and I think that's what's coming to our cities. It was similar to this, but much less developed. And it was saying, you know, this is coming to our cities anywhere. You see the screens, and we were the first, and you too, to develop an LED video screen. And now I see them everywhere. So I have some small level of responsibility for that. And I wanted to say, well, if we're having these in our cities, why are we having them? Why are we showing ads? Who wants to watch ads? And so I've been saying that for over a decade. And so making that shift between, you know, entertainment is just media architecture in another forum. It's just serving a narrative of a musical artist or a musician. And what we call media architecture now is serving the narrative of an architect or a developer or a builder. And you know, you think at a concert, you're sharing in the experience, and that is part of it. But the way the light works, that's not your narrative. So anyway, it's a bit like understanding my craft, understanding who I am and what I want to say. And that is not something that that's a question I'm still answering. I am a student after all. So it wasn't really a process that I considered. It was more a continual redefining of how I communicate. Kathy Chan, thank you, Kathy. It says, thanks for your presentation. All of your projects look like dream projects. At this stage in your career, what would your next dream project be? It's interesting you ask, Kathy. We're developing those as we speak, to be honest. And I don't know if I should show any of them, but essentially what I see now is bigger than those projects. Those are single buildings. And I've seen many times in China how entire cities are illuminated at certain times that speaks for an entire city. So they're coordinated light spectacles. You can see them, Hong Kong Symphony of Light. That's not a particularly good one, I don't think. Shenzhen does a particularly amazing one. The story's not that clear, but you can see it in cities all over the world. There's light festivals. There's one in Vancouver, I know, which is it's still relatively small, but here in Sydney, or not here, but here in Australia, there's one in Sydney called Vivid, huge. So also in Lyon, in London, in Edinburgh, all over the world, these light festivals are growing. So the hunger for and the appetite for these sort of large collective expressions is really growing. And that's where we're finding the call for us to shape those in a meaningful way, to make them of some quality, to make them so that they last, to make them so that they encourage others to express themselves through that medium. So that is, that's where we're headed now. And I don't look too far ahead, really, because it just keeps coming to me. And that's what I see happening now, where, some cities are working on the lobby or or one building, and other cities are working on the whole city. And that's a really interesting development. And some of it, like lots of the stuff that you see, will be crap. So, so everyone on this call, could you please get on it and start making some quality and changing how your city looks, please? Just asking. Bob asked another question saying, it's interesting to me you showing Times Square as an example of old ideas. It's tired and not very engaging. I really hope property owners look to people like you to reimagine spaces to be more than just something they can hang a logo on. If it's all about advertising dollars, maybe they can think of a way to fuse the transformative nature of what you're doing with the way too obvious and boring nature of advertising in the US. Maybe it's subversive, but it's definitely more interesting. Love the way you framed that, Bob, because that is pretty much what I've been saying for many years now. As I said in my presentation, I don't know anybody who likes ads, so why is our cities filled with ads? It seems a bit odd to me. So there's some other interests going on there. And we're now lobbying Melbourne Council, Sydney Council to change that, to start putting guidelines in that say if you get to put a screen on the wall, certain percentage of that has to be creative or community content. Seems a pretty easy ask, really. But that's an advertising thing that is a whole probably other discussion. Advertising is still working on, back when newspapers started. And there was a space in the newspaper and you sold the space. Then there's a billboard on the street and you sold the space. Now there's an LED screen and you sell the space. It's just, yeah. And it's changing though, but slowly. very slowly. IES, would I be interested in working with another band or musical artist again? Yes, always interested. I've done that, not that recently, but over the past few years, I've worked with various artists and bands. It's still quite interesting, and it's a different discipline where, on the road, if it looks like it works, it works. And in permanent installations, of many of you know, it doesn't fly. It has to be very detailed and exact, or it won't keep working. But on the road, you have to move it from city to city every day, and that is an incredibly difficult discipline to do. And so, but it is also freeing. There's very few committees in rock and roll. If the singer likes it, and you're doing it. If he doesn't, then you're not. And so it's a very freeing lighting discipline, but also it happens in the same place every time, in a theater or a gig or an amphitheater or an outdoor field. It's all the same structure. It's very difficult to get out of that structure. And sometimes it can feel like you're trying to rearrange a cup and saucer. And you got the same building, same roof, same rigging. So that also has some restrictions. So I'm open to it, but kind of busy at the moment. So I don't expect to get too many calls from that world, but who knows? Next question is, I feel your drive to change the way light is done. Your company can only do so much in a year. How do you motivate the wider industry of architectural light designers to respect this ethos and get on board? It's very kind, thank you. I guess through things like this and forums and ways of connecting with, I haven't been that great at connecting with the sort of architectural design industry, lighting designers, but I really respect it and have great friends in it. There's some awesome companies out there doing architectural lighting and doing artworks and interactive content, and there's just so much there for us to work with, and it's coming more and more and more. So I guess the motivation comes from the work we do. That's all, and knowing that I am a very open, accessible person, and I am, as I said, like you, I am an expert. So claim it. Like you, I am a student, and there's lots I still have to learn. So that balance keeps me on the ground, and I can see for centuries. So that, I guess, is the only way I can answer that question. Yes, I think that it's now about an hour and a bit. And seems like people are probably up for going, so that's cool. Unless anybody has any further questions, I'll throw back to you, Carl. I really, really appreciate all your time, all your questions, and how engaged you've been. It's really been a joy to present, and I hope we catch up in person someday soon. And maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, maybe Melbourne at that time will have toilet paper. Who knows? I don't know. So anyway, thank you again so much, and thanks, Carl, for facilitating this.
Yeah.